Hi everyone, and welcome back to Briefly Speaking by Regally Legal, your go-to destination for bit-sized insights and bold conversations that unravel the world around us. From the realms of fashion and law to everything in between, this truly is your one-stop for it all. And today, we're thrilled to be joined by one of the most influential voices in Indian intellectual property law, a designated senior advocate, a pioneer who helped shape India's early IP enforcement landscape, an author, a legal tech innovator whose work has quietly influenced how brands, creators, and courts understand intellectual property. As we explored his journey, one thing stood out very clearly. He didn't merely practice IP law, he helped build its ecosystem in India. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Chandramohan Lal. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. It truly means a lot that you're finally on the podcast, and I hope everyone who's listening is able to take something back from.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
So, sir, before I dive into the more informative part of the podcast, we actually share a connection, which is Modern School Barakhamba. We're both alumni of Modern School Barakhamba. And my question for you is that I know that you were actively involved in leadership as well and still are through Masosa. Looking back, how did your formative years, school, university, early exposure, shape your interest in law, and did leadership play a role in the professional values that you so rightly still carry today?
Well, that's a lot of questions in one. So certainly when you mentioned modern school, I don't want to go down which year you passed out and which year I passed out. We won't go down that path. But I certainly think modern school shaped me for who I am today. Clearly, the initial days shape a personality. It's a very unusual way that I got shaped because in the legal profession, one normally understands the shaping to be a good student or somebody who studies hard.
Yeah.
But I was somebody who partied very hard, which modern school inculcated in me.
Rightly so.
And gave me the confidence to deal with the world, which I give full credit to my school. I don't think any other school could give you that kind of a foundation that modern school gave me. Thereafter, I think it was the college, and thereafter was a downward journey because I was a bad student. But I was very, very gregarious and outgoing. And I think that's what shaped my success, whatever success I had in the profession. Because I understood people very well. I went out and met a lot of people. I partied very hard and I had lots of diverse interests. So I was a good conversationist. And I think that helped me get clients. And when I put my head down to studying law and combining that with my initial days of preparation, which the school gave me, and the subsequent days in college, etc., certainly helped shape who I am today, which is a very unusual path for most people. I don't think schools and colleges give you leadership that as much as the profession then actually does. I was very influenced by my father. I joined his practice very early in my life, left his practice equally early in my life, and therefore went out there and had to make it on my own. But the Lal name always helped because my father was a giant in the intellectual property field. So I'm sure that name helped me a lot, and I think it did. Yes, people, I looked up to a lot of people. Mr. Arun Jaitley was somebody I greatly looked up to. Lots of other senior advocates at that time when, as young lawyers, you sit into court and listen to people. And I was amazed at how comfortably they could argue in front of people and how a room full of, other people listening into you. At that time, you're nervous what you are even going to say in court. And I guess I'm in that position today. I can walk into any court and sort of start arguing.
Absolutely, 100%, no doubt about that. And like you said, sir, I don't know why people could have different opinions on modern Barakhamba, and every student has, their own journey. But like you said, I think the shell that every person is, a school tends to kind of nurture it in different ways. And with modern, personally, I have experienced something completely similar. I was kind of an introvert earlier on, but as and when I, got exposed to more and more kinds of people in the form of different students, I think it just kind of helped me in my university days as well, because you're already out there, you're exposed to social friendliness and all of it. So it's not really hard for you to kind of break that shell that I'd say a lot of people break when they go to university. So
True, and I head the Modernites Trust, so we get underprivileged children admitted into modern school, and the alumni pays for them.
okay.
And I've seen kids starting in 6th standard, we start from 6th standard to 12th standard, who couldn't speak a word of English, who came from very, very frugal backgrounds. And we were very worried when I initially started sponsoring and getting into the trust, very worried how, in an elitist school, how would these children sort of survive?
Yeah.
And I'm very thrilled to say that several kids have been completely transformed and
Absolutely.
changed lives for their families and changed, it's a transformation of a different level. Very, very sort of, then, with time I became the chair of the trust, and it's very satisfying to see these children go through a
100%.
modern school.
I think beyond the educational scape, whenever somebody is able to kind of get out of that shell itself, sir, rightly so, 100%.
True.
Yeah. Now, sir, the next question for you is going to go into now straightly the informative part of the podcast. Now, sir, all the questions are based on an online service. So these are questions that each and every person who follows Regally Legal really wants you to answer. So I think without further ado, I'm going to go right in. Today in India, IP is often treated as a compliance exercise, something you file, you register, and then you most likely forget. But globally, especially in fashion forward markets, IP is treated as a strategic business weapon. From your decades of experience, where does India truly stand today? And are we protecting creativity effectively or underestimating the economic or cultural power of IP?
It's interesting. If your question is a populist question, I'm not surprised. And it's very discouraging to hear something like this. And I think we are still a struggling third world nation because we've never understood intellectual property at all. I've seen intellectual property to being nothing managed by 2 or 3 law firms to today being a very robust, what we consider comparatively a very robust IP practice. But when you compare to the West, we are way behind. And the problem lies in us not recognizing that as an asset at all. And that's the biggest issue. And your question reflects that.
Absolutely.
Is IP to be filed and forgotten?
Yeah.
Fill it, shut it, forget it? Absolutely not. And when you start hiring, when you go to the IITs, they didn't even know what intellectual property was just 15 years ago. And if people had patent applications, somebody came and boasted, say, I have 5 patent registrations, but what did you do with those registrations? Did you monetize those registrations? The answer was no, I don't even know how to. When you went to the government and said, do IP protection, they didn't understand it. I don't think we understand it even today. And if you look at the top companies today, they are 100% IP dependent. When you're the Amazons of the world,
100%.
the top brands used to be Coca-Cola, hard good manufacturers, General Electric or stuff like that. Today, it's all Amazons and of the world. So it's entirely IP dependent. I mean, there is not even a corresponding 5% brick and mortar business in this. And if we don't recognize IP as an asset, then you lose.
Absolutely.
You snooze, you lose. And I think all our IP owners are snoozing.
Yeah.
Our legal systems resultantly are not being, they are pressured enough, but not being pressured more by IP owners for a more robust IP protection regime. And you talk to any IP owner across fields, and they are saying, we are running far away from any form of enforcement. I can't afford it. I won't get relief. What is the point? Somebody asked me to register it, and I've registered it, but I don't know what to do with it. And in your fashion industry, somebody copied my design.
Yes.
I have no idea what to do. I moved on.
Yeah.
And
This
that's
is
the bad truth.
Common line.
It is the saddest truth and so far away from reality. That's not even funny. So the owner and the enforcement arm is so far apart that gap, to bridge that gap, will probably take several decades.
Absolutely, sir. 100% agreed. And like you said, in the fashion industry, more so, it's in any industry, but IP today as an asset is to be recognized more and more, because I think it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere.
Exactly.
And, the more earlier people recognize the need to also monetize it, that that, that's also an option for you to do that. I think it'll just be better for each and every person to move ahead in any industry that they're...
So resultantly, because we don't recognize intellectual property, the creativity element suffers.
Yes.
We think it's easier to copy than to create. Ask the people who've created fresh are not able to protect, don't have the inclination to protect, don't have the knowledge to protect. So it's a vicious circle. Resultantly, why should I spend so much time, effort, and money into new creation? And yet, what is the difference between one garment to another? So, it is your design, it is your feature, and without the intellectual property in creating that new design, you are just another product.
Person, yeah.
So,
likely so, sir. And I think awareness is the first step. When we talk about cases which highlight, say, the Prada Kolhapuri, it's usually when such a big thing happens and then India collectively as, a community of people who, kind of feel bad, it's then when they decide to raise their voice, related to IP. It's not usually on a day-to-day basis, which is not, I'd say, the hardest part for anyone to do. But that's not the case.
Yeah, your Kolhapuri chappal today is being sold for, I don't know how many, what is it? A couple of hundred pounds?
Initially, it's in pounds.
Yes, it's in...
it was massive, the collection that they did with Prada Kolhapuri. Now they've given us credit, but the ones that we sell are, well, after bargaining with an Indian person, you can get it for 150 rupees at max. I don't think we can go beyond that.
So there you go.
But, yeah.
There you go. So somebody saw the potential in a simple Kolhapuri chappal and made it into something different by adding what? IP to it. Adding the word Prada to it. Giving it a chic look. Probably, I don't know, they've refurbished something up.
So I'd say it's exactly the same though. But 100%.
But look at the value add.
Yeah, actually.
You make a 150 rupee product into a 150 pound or more product.
Yeah.
So the value out of intellectual property is right there. That same product, maybe a little better constructed than a Kolhapuri chappal, but has suddenly shot up in value and the profitability has gone up. So there you are, the value of intellectual property, where the actual good is just this much and the IP value is just huge on top of that.
So my next question for you is something drawing on the same lines of what we've discussed. Luxury fashion houses often speak of drawing inspiration from Indian crafts, the Kolhapuri sandal, handloom textiles, temple jewelry motifs, all of it. So from a strict IP sense, where does inspiration end and appropriation begin? And why does India still struggle to legally push back on global fast fashion giants, monetize our cultural heritage?
Appropriation can only be done of something tangible in front of you. Otherwise, it's all inspiration. If I don't have something documented, it becomes inspiration rather than something which you've lifted. Unfortunately, none of us, our governments haven't, our communities haven't collated our rich heritage and culture. Forget monetizing it in a way. We would still look at a Kolhapuri chappal manufacturer as a small-scale industry and say, give him subsidies. Rather than encourage it to make it a marketable commodity at a higher price. Shoe companies are making rubbish shoes with plastic and selling it for 10 times the price, but this is good quality leather, handmade, which is selling for pittance. So we look at it very differently. We don't look at it as a value add. We look at it as something which is traditionally Indian. We must maintain it, so we must subsidize it. And the government is sort of very, let's encourage it so that we look good. And resultantly, the whole atmosphere is very defeatist, if I may say so.
It's black and white. It's not like, for the government or anybody to see the value to it, you should at least...
So Indians are so good at making money, but because you don't understand the subject, you can't monetize it. I can monetize from a Bombay sandwich guy can make more money. Then because he sees the sandwich in front of him, then if he has an intellectual property of how that sandwich was built, or he gives it as a special recipe. Coke has a special recipe for over 100 years now. It's a soft drink, but it's been promoted in a particular way and sold. So some very small, nondescript issues are then picked up by the West, recognized, and then taken to a different level.
A level that I don't think any Indian can imagine taking it in
Correct.
India as well.
Our jewelers probably make more better jewelry than most of the Pradas, etc.
100%.
But they are all family owned, family run, single jewelry. So somebody else copies it. So he says, I can't do anything. These are moneyed people. Jewelers are moneyed people. But they will also not protect their designs, which are then inspired or copied from Indian designs. The film industry does the same, get inspired by.
I won't take any name, but you mentioned something about jewelry houses 2 days back. It's the wedding season, so, well, naturally jewelry and everything has been going on. But we visited a very, very good jewelry house in Delhi, and they're very renowned people, have the best of actors as their brand ambassadors. And we happened to go to their South X store, and they showed us some pieces. And naturally, my dadi, being the Punjabi person that she is, she's like, we just saw it at some other store and they're selling it at a very good price. So what are you, kind of adding to it? And rightly so, the owner was sitting right there. Instead of actually being, I'd say, a little furious about the fact that something that you've created with so much hard work, precision, detail-oriented is being copied from someone, he just said that we know. And, well, there's close to nothing that, we choose to do about it, which is kind of what, triggered the whole idea in my head that I don't think they're aware about, the situation of doing something about it and possibly also making money out of it.
Correct.
It's just, like I said, I think it's a very black and white area.
No, suppose you'd gone to that jeweler and said, he had said, why is this expensive? And he had said, because of the design.
Yeah.
What would your reaction have been? You don't charge for design, you charge for gold, what's in it. Those are something that we can see and look at.
Look.
But surely you're not charging me double for design.
Exactly. Exactly. That too, it's mimicked. Like, it does not even
If
have
it's
to...
mimicked, but if it's not, what if it's not? What if it was genuinely original design? Would you pay double the price?
No.
There you go.
No.
So the value is not in the design because the jeweler doesn't value that design.
Exactly.
He's not going to protect that design. Somebody else is going to make that design for half the price. So you are not going to pay for that.
I wouldn't, kind of place my bet there because I don't think he also has so much of confidence in his designs.
Correct.
I would view it like that I don't think you're confident enough in any design that you've created probably. So why should I...
Which designer outfit can you today buy at 10x price, which you can't get at 1x in Chandni Chowk?
Actually.
Not one.
Not one.
Not one.
Rightly so not one.
So then they will put in, safeguards to the extent you can't take pictures, you can't do this, you can't come into my showroom and have any kind of, take any form of photography. Big deal.
Yeah,
The
big
people,
deal, actually.
people who want to copy you will come and buy one and then go and make hundreds out of it. And so you will not pay for that design because you know that the designing element is available at 1/10 the price. So for us, intangible is air.
Yeah.
And well, in Delhi, people pay for air today. We'll pay for air. So air is also precious today. So air is also valuable today, which we don't get.
So I'm going to go to my next question. Now, I'm just going to be a little practical with this one. If a young fashion brand had limited resources and could protect only one thing, their brand name, logo, or designs, what should they prioritize first and say why?
Certainly the brand name, because brand name can live forever. A design may not live forever. A design has a limited life, but a brand lives forever. And the brand, you can have several substandard designs, but if it is your brand, it suddenly becomes valuable.
Okay.
Many shapes and sizes and designs that you will see with a Prada on it will have a different look to it than being sold on the streets. So certainly it's your brand because that is something that you've got to nurture for your life because then it becomes easier for you to market your products once you develop a brand and a brand value for having high-end, high design, whatever your mojo is portrayed in that brand. So if you have to protect one of the three, I don't see why you won't protect all three.
All three.
But since your question is one, I would say brand because I think that has the maximum value now and in the future, but it also requires a maximum amount of investment. A design is created, it's done.
Yeah.
A brand has to be nurtured. It's like a little child. As it grows, it becomes more valuable. But if you let it being replicated by many, then it's too late. Then you lose it. So you've got to nurture it, but if you nurture it well, then it really adds value to what you
And you would probably be able to, I think, bear a lot of value out of it later.
Right. I mean, today a Coca-Cola soft drink without Coca-Cola or Pepsi on it has
Yeah.
no value at all.
Zero.
Right.
Yeah.
So there you go. So that's the value of the brand. Or an automobile without a star or a BMW or a a logo on it has no value whatsoever, no matter how well engineered that product is. So when you have a new launch, like when MG comes into India, there's just advertising splash because
Yeah.
it's the brand which is being pushed. That MG now, the English car made in China, has now come into India. Once you establish that brand, now whichever rubbish car you put out sells. I mean, rubbish, I'm not saying to any particular, but you know what I mean.
Yes, I do.
Your value certainly goes up. If it's an X, let's say an MG, then you say it's a good car. X car was good, so the Y car will be equally good. May not be, right? So
rightly so. I think even you, because you mentioned automobiles, the EV, if it's say a BYD, so now on the road, like, any kind of product that I'd say BYD launches, it automatically becomes like this epitome of like, okay, EV, and then they resonate it with the brand name, build your own dream.
Right.
So they're able to kind of catch that together. So I think 100% agreed on the fact that a brand name is something that even to a, normal human, if I hear, say, Coca-Cola, like you said, I would inclined,
Right.
like I would be more inclined towards going ahead.
So BYD has a whole story. It is probably the most advanced battery company in the world.
100%.
And so every automobile today has probably got a BYD battery.
Yes.
So how do I know all of this information is in three letters, right? BYD.
That's true.
So when moment I see BYD, it immediately my brain tells me this must be for EVs. This is probably the best car. If they make the best battery, surely they make the best cars.
And I think, so because you mentioned BYD batteries, I don't think not many people know this, but in the EV industry, like say, like you said brand name, I'll try to stick to the IP side of it. But Mahindra uses EV batteries that are BYD made.
BYD, correct.
So, it's just the name that kind of resonates with the fact that the EV and then BYD go hand in hand, 100%.
You buy t-shirts. So you buy a t-shirt with Adidas on it.
Yeah.
Why would you want to advertise Adidas brand? But suddenly your t-shirt from 100 rupee t-shirt becomes a 1,000 rupee t-shirt.
Yeah.
If it has a little crocodile on the left, chest, looking one direction, then it's Lacoste, and that suddenly the value just shoots up. That same t-shirt outside, which is probably as good quality, without the crocodile will not make that kind of money. So why do people have, which is that Raja Rani ki Prem Kahani, where he's wearing all these gaudy outfits with all the branding on it,
Rocky Rani.
Rocky Rani. I did not like that movie, so I don't want.
Well, that movie inspired so many really people to come out in their brands and all.
There you go. So why would you wear a LV print on your, and advertise their name? Because you believe that suddenly that garment, which otherwise I would have said how ugly that is, saying, oh my God, it's LV, so he's paid a packet for it. So it's giving a message.
It's giving brand value to a normal person like say me.
It's sort of your brain.
It's giving a kick to
playing with it's playing with your brain. Your brain has an immediate association.
Yes.
So you're not even looking at the cuts or anything, but you're saying, oh, this must be something good.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. A Dharma movie, an actor wearing something that has, say, a brand value of anything. A person like me as well, I'd say, okay, I'll get a little.
There you go.
Out of my head.
So there's the value.
Yeah,
there you go.
100%. Now, sir, I'm going to ask my next question, which is going to be a little personal and powerful. Your book, At the Pleasure of His Majesty, through your grandfather, respected Ayan Lal, you document resistance against colonial injustice, the fight for procedural fairness, and the protection of Indian cultural heritage. While colonialism may be behind us, do you see today's cultural appropriation battles in fashion as a modern continuation of the same struggle, only now fought in, say, courtrooms and contracts and all of it?
Not at all. I think it's something to, I guess even imperialism was something to learn from. They brought in a lot of systems which we are still carrying on, the railways, etc., etc. A lot of your administrative systems, my book talks of it, is still from the British Raj. This is another example of where we need to learn from the West. If they come and misappropriate, as you call misappropriation, your Kolhapuri chappal, then for God's sake, what were you doing sleeping over a Kolhapuri chappal for all these years? Learn that you didn't protect it, somebody else saw value in it, and came and got inspired by it. You called it misappropriation after somebody else put value to it, and suddenly it blew up in the face. So why have you not recognized? And we are sitting on so much of culture and color and variety of creativity across the board. I think in the copyright industry, look at the number of languages we have. So the writings in those languages are so rich. Garments, apparel, footwear, headwear.
Thriving.
It's every state, every 100 kilometers, everything changes. So why are we not capturing all this and monetizing it and making it something fashionable or, So somebody else comes and teaches us and we call it theft. But then if you're sitting in your house with gold sitting outside, you never knew the value. Somebody comes and picks it up and goes and you suddenly say theft, but you didn't even know it was lying outside, right? So I think we've got to recognize that value and for that, allow that person to make money from that value so that there is general respect, overall respect. I was reading an interesting article today of how Indians behave differently in the metro than in a bus station. The reason being that when you go to a metro, it's clean, so you want to maintain the cleanliness. A bus station may not be. There is a element of order, which says that, yes, if you allow people to get off first, you will get time to get on. There's an assurance. If you can't get on, 2 minutes later, you will get another train. So people wait on the left, allow people to get off and then get in. But that doesn't happen in the bus because nothing is marked. There is no sense of anybody watching over you, that if you do something wrong, there's no sense of propriety, that if you were to, in Japan, if you break a queue, you're like looked down upon. No, nobody will say anything, but nobody will even think of it. So it's so stark. You get out of a metro station and get onto a bus stand and behave differently. That same person will behave differently. So that, I think, is the IP scenario going on. That because the owner is behaving differently or the purchaser is behaving so indifferently, that there is an element of indifference in recognition of IP, and therefore there's no respect for IP. As a result of that, there's copying of IP, as a result of which enforcement becomes difficult because everybody thinks it's their inherent right to copy.
I don't think so. I could have put it, or anybody could have put it in a better way. 100%.
I just see this circle of life replaying itself day after day after day. And that's why I asked you the question of, would you have paid 100% more for the design? To your jeweler, you wouldn't have, but to Prada, you will. You won't even question it. So because you've been psyched to say Prada, where you are not to question, but a jeweler, you can.
100% agreed with you. 100%. Like the example, like you said, is just playing in my head as we speak as well. That it's usually a decorum of a place basically just, kind of is responsible for how you behave as well. So if the decorum of, say, the IP industry in general is set in a way that we as humans would feel a little guilty for not abiding by it.
Exactly.
The inner conscious
and there are consequences.
Us to act a certain way.
You start challaning people on a red light, jumping a red light. Tomorrow, nobody will jump a red light because once there's a newspaper article that 100 people were challaned yesterday, now 2,000 rupees each, nobody will jump the light the next day. But the next time you're standing on the light, somebody jumps it and goes and says, you will have a tendency to also start moving. And then that whole thing, when the lights go off, then everybody just comes in between, right? Nobody waits for the other. So we live in chaos. And I think our administration thrives on chaos because they find their passages through.
Oh, 100%.
They find their lanes are empty. Our lanes are cluttered. And because our lanes are cluttered, they can pull one person out and put them in the straight lane and say, see, I helped you. But they will not put the whole system in place because then they become
the chaos
redundant.
And
they become redundant. So I think that is where I see our administrators don't want it. I think we are the most, from a nation, I've traveled a lot. I've traveled to Africa a lot. But in terms of discipline, I think we lack discipline the most as a community. Individually, yes. An individual's life will be more disciplined than anybody in the world. prayer at this time, exercise.
Yeah.
But once we step out of our houses and we go into a community, our communal
that way.
thinking is just chaotic, which is, let me cut my way through, because the system is not going to work.
Yeah.
If I keep standing in a queue,
You-
I'll never reach in
Yeah.
front.
There's no
Everybody else will
reach
go
out.
around me, and our port systems are exactly that.
You
And
get
that's
consumed.
that's my advice to IP owners. If you push your way through in our court system, you will succeed. But if you sit back and wait,
Yeah.
everybody else will come and enforce. So today there is more enforcement happening of international brands in an overburdened court system than of Indian brands.
Yeah.
Because our Indian brands or Indian IP owners are not coming forward as much as an international IP
International,
owner is, who recognizes that, yes, if I break the queue and get my relief, I'm happy, I'm out of here.
Yeah. And you're actually sorted.
Yeah.
You're
So in an
sorted.
overburdened system, we may be catering more to
Yeah.
people who recognize and respect that system of what is available.
Now, sir, the next question for you, and as we come closer to the end of the podcast as well, you were among the earliest adopters of legal tech in India with Click IPR. Today, with AI generating designs, prints, and even full fashion collection, who truly owns the IP? The programmer, the brand, the user, or no one at all?
It could be no one, it could be all of the above.
Yeah.
It could be all of the above. It depends if the programming is done so specifically to create certain creative elements. It could be the programmer. It could also be that AI has applied something which is beyond a human intelligence, and therefore it's a 100% AI creation. Or it could simply be a tool that somebody, the creator, has used as a typewriter
Yeah.
to put out his thoughts. So AI till now is clearly working on inputs. If your inputs are good, it will give you a better output. So who puts in that inputs? What I'll be able to extract on intellectual property law, you may not be able to.
Yeah.
Likewise, a good designer, what they'll be able to extract from AI, I will not be able to. So an input element is there. But how will you bifurcate that? With AI, it's going to get tougher and tougher, because AI, the future of AI is that it is going to be self-creative. It gets so much of information. It is able to crunch so much of information that no one human can assimilate that and say, this is my creativity. So it will be a combination of all three. It will work itself out over time, depending on the technologies, how much input has gone in. But if I can certainly show as a creator that I used these kind of input commands is what resulted in this output, I could certainly claim some elements of intellectual property in that.
So I'd say it almost depends upon your input into, say, the...
Depends on the programming. How much will the programmer take credit for what he did? Because if there are specified AI tools for law, for example, or for fashion designers, then maybe the AI creator will take a lot of credit for saying, look, a lot of my intelligence went into the machine or the way the machine behaves. So I must get a large part of that credit. How much is the machine learning happening is another aspect, and how much is human input that produced these kind of results. So it's a very difficult, it'll be a fact-based answer.
Yeah.
Depending on what went in.
And a combination of it all.
Correct.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Now, sir, this is the final question for you before we go into just a fun round. For young lawyers, especially listening, if there's one uncomfortable truth about building a career in fashion and IP law that no one tells young professionals, what would it be?
One uncomfortable truth.
Yeah.
I would say hang in there. Nobody has succeeded in this profession in the first 10 years, 15 years. Understand the subject. The more you understand it, law is a bottomless pit.
Yeah.
There's no amount of time that you can spend reading on a particular subject or topic. You'll be amazed that you could spend a lifetime on. People used to think intellectual property was a very easy part of law and it's just four act. But when people dug in deeper, you could read about intellectual property law for your lifetime and still not know enough. So be ready to put in the hard work. I think what you're doing is very creditable, because I think putting it out there in terms of podcasts and educating the owners will enhance the knowledge base of the people who actually are sitting on the properties, and they must open up their vaults and bring them out to the public to make their money rather than like gold, keep it in a vault and not do anything with it. Come out with those gold bars, make it into fine jewelry, enhance value to it by adding intellectual property. That'll enhance the understanding. So change the entire scenario of and make it into a metro rather than a
bus stand. 100%. Yeah. Like you rightly said about the part where patience is the key, I think, in the legal profession. From whatever little knowledge I've gained, till date about law, about IP, about fashion, I think one thing remains consistent, and that is for you to not get, kind of deviated from the path, and just to kind of, like you rightly said, hang in there and just hope for the best.
I mean, even today, I have low days where I have very little work.
Yeah.
But I'll have another day where I have a lot of
work. 100%.
And I say this off and on. The day I win 5 cases, I know that losing 5 is around the corner.
Oh.
And equally vice versa, even today. So I can't say that every day I walk into court and my hands are full. No, they're not. I get, and of course I love those days when I have no matters, which are becoming few and far between. But if I get a day when I have no cases and my clerk tells me no cases tomorrow, I'm the happiest person. So even today, despite being in the profession for that long,
many years,
you still go through the ups and downs. In a younger stage, oh my God, when I used to travel abroad to get new work, you were counting your dollars that you spent and you've not made those in the year or the next year or the year after that. You're just spending and not getting it back. So the downward troughs were far more than the ups. So it's never a straight line. Don't think anybody in this profession has got a straight line who's going all the way up.
So I was in the UK and I did an internship, and because you mentioned that it's not going to go in a straight line, I'd say 3 years back, my mindset was completely different. I think it was that life will go in a straight line and that you don't have to worry about anything. And I did an internship and that was a good pay, naturally, because it was in the UK, affiliated with the university and all of it. And cut to when I started practicing in India, I started working with lawyers and all of it. And I came with the mindset, okay, if, there's, say, an XYZ firm in the UK paid me this much, okay, I wasn't expecting that much, but maybe close to that. And cut to was a slap on the face. And that's when I have cried so much in front of my dad that I don't know what's happening. And he's like, exactly what I said to you about the profession. And nobody in my family is a lawyer. So it's a first generation thing I'm facing. And they said that we said this to you on day 1 of you choosing legal studies as a subject in 11th standard, that it's not going to be easy and you just have to be patient through it all. And I think it was then when I realized it's not going to go in a straight line.
No,
it's going to be like this the entire time.
If it's any consolation, it's not going to change.
Oh.
If you think 30 years from now it's going to be a straight line, it doesn't happen.
But I think I've started enjoying the fact that it's not a straight line. Yeah, I think
that's the fun part.
Yeah, that's actually...
If it was a straight line, it would be so boring.
Exactly. Now you have 2 ways, either to sit, with your head down and say that, oh, it's like that. But I mean, I enjoy it now. Obviously, I'm too early into it as well. But like seeing you, I feel like there's just a lot of positivity my way about the fact that you can embrace that. It's fun.
It's a great, let me tell you, it is one of the best professions in the world because I think it's so alive. Every day there are different issues.
Yeah.
The way you have a good day in court. I would love to retire, but I love my profession so much. But who knows, one fine day.
Well, we would hope for you to never retire. We would actually hope for you to never
retire. I can assure you, my interviews after my retirement will be far more fun than these.
Yeah.
I'll have so many good stories to tell you.
Well, we'll be waiting then.
Not that I don't have them now, but...
Yeah. We'll be waiting. Okay. We'll be waiting. Now, sir, the last round is something that we called as the legally fashionable round. It's just a this and that fun, no overthinking required here. So, number 1, courtroom arguments or behind-the-scenes strategy?
Has to be both. I'm sorry, I can't pick one. There's no courtroom strategy without behind-the-scenes strategy.
What's that? Strong enforcement or flexible interpretation of the law?
Tend to say strong enforcement.
Okay. Original design or strong brand identity?
Strong brand identity, comparing the two.
Yeah. Protecting culture through law or through commercialization?
Commercialization.
AI-assisted creativity or pure human originality?
AI-assisted.
Winning the case or setting a precedent?
Both. win and set a
Yes.
precedent.
Yes. And so the last one for you is technology as a tool or technology as a threat?
Oh, completely tool.
Tool?
Absolutely tool.
Okay.
Where is it a threat? Poor thing.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. I mean, I started using computers some 20 years ago. I can't even imagine reading a paper today. And the research tools have enhanced so much technology. Imagine going through AIR manuals in the past. Going to the British Library or the American High Commission and doing, the American Embassy Library and trying to sift through books. Today it's a Control F, find, and it's locate.
It's all right there in
right
front
there.
of you.
Technology definitely enhances human capabilities.
So that brings me to the end of the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've had the most fun, honestly.
Thank you.
And it was, I think, long with you as well. I was waiting for you to be on the podcast because I knew it was just going to be fun. I saw a couple of interviews before. And I knew that it was going to be amazing. But thank you so much. I am 100% sure that all of you guys listening will 100% be able to take something back from it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.